This program is brought to you by Emory University.
When you're reading poetry, you read it more than once. And close reading, this is the trade secret of the English department, you can get a lot of meaning out of things even if the author wasn't intending to put them there, or even if it's a found poem that you've rearranged on the page and you read it as if it were a poem, and meaning comes out. I mean, it's not a magician's parlor trick or something like that. The language has this kind of capacity. I once wrote down a few pithy statements about poetry when I was trying to explain to my students what it is, and one of them I said that poetry is singing that makes its own music out of the sounds and rhythms of common speech, words that perform on their own without musical accompaniment or vocal setting. Song lyrics may be poems, but they must leave their vocalization and instrumentation at the door when they audition. And so I guess what I want to do is audition Paul Simon's poem Graceland. I'm going to say poem. But as you can find on YouTube and Wikipedia and any of the social media, Simon says that he often composes his songs after he's got the musical track laid down. And specifically, he said that at great length about the song Graceland and the album Graceland, where he went over and recorded with these South African musicians that he was fascinated by, but he didn't have a deep understanding of South African music and the varieties of it. He also didn't have a deep understanding of South African politics, or at least he didn't care to get as sort of politically involved as he was forced to, as people were protesting, oh, you shouldn't do that. And there were very good reasons why he should do it. He said they came back to New York. They went and they recorded in Johannesburg. They came back to New York and they had a bunch of tracks. And he said, so I was fairly desperate. I had to write lyrics. And when he started the song Graceland, which then became the title song of the album, he started out, talking about Graceland, going to Graceland. And he said, I knew that couldn't stay. That was, that had nothing to do with South Africa. And he said, but then I realized it had to stay, and that was the kind of vehicle. So what's the association process? What do we get out of reading this with some awareness of the fact that this has a South African origin and destination, but it also points to other parts of American musical history and Paul Simon's own musical history. That first stanza, the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. I am following the river down the highway through the cradle of the Civil War. Nice half-rhyme, guitar and war. You almost don't notice it until you kind of focus on it. You think about it, the Mississippi Delta is shining. Mississippi Delta is this huge area, unless he's confusing the Mississippi River Delta with the large section of mostly Mississippi, I guess it is, that's called the Mississippi Delta. How could 14 counties be shining? Well, he's playing fast and loose with his categories, and interpreting poetry, you learn quickly not to be too literal minded. However, a national guitar is a nice simile, because traditionally they had metal resonators and kind of shiny plates on the top. So there is a kind of logic, and of course, what kind of music is played on national guitars? Well, lots of kinds of music, but there were some very important Delta blues people, including Son House, who played national guitar. So already he's kind of evoking and channeling certain kind of musical associations. Not to mention Graceland. He's going to Graceland. So I'm going to Graceland in Memphis, Tennessee, in case we didn't know where it was. I'm going to Graceland, poor boys and pilgrims with their families, and we are going to Graceland. A number of years ago, I taught a course on Elvis Presley, which I'm neither ashamed nor proud of. And I remember hearing, this song by Paul Simon and thinking, oh, great, I can use this to illustrate Graceland, and the importance of the pilgrimage to Graceland. And then I listened and I said, well, no, I can't, because it's only alluding to something. And of course, probably most people know, on the anniversary of Elvis Presley's death, August 16th, There's a whole week of literally pilgrims coming to Graceland. I mean, these people, it's not just a tongue-in-cheek, oh, they think they're pilgrims. They really are coming to pay homage to, a figure who, like Paul Simon, like Bob Dylan, these popular songwriters who become almost mythic. Poor boys and pilgrims with families, we are going to Graceland. It starts out, well, it fades in and out of a personal voice, but then it becomes a communal voice, and it's sort of reaching out. And I would say one thing it's reaching out to is African American music as channeled by Elvis Presley into rock and roll, which is a well-known fact. Whether he's consciously thinking of that, I don't know. Probably not. Doesn't really matter. But given the context of him going over to Johannesburg, him coming back, him trying to fit American, thinking, oh, American lyrics won't fit, and then realizing they did. The line later on where says there's a girl in New York City who calls herself a human trampoline. When he first commented on that, he said, well, that's a very New York kind of line. It's absurdist poetry. Nobody in South Africa would understand it. But he did manage to sort of bring these widely divergent things together, particularly in this phase, beginning with Graceland, going on with the Rhythm of the Saints, perhaps even the ill-fated Cape Man. He's trying to synthesize the diversity of cultural and ethnic experience in the American experience. My traveling companion is 9 years old. He is the child of my first marriage. Gosh, where did that come from? I mean, it's a totally different register of, sort of almost confessional, autobiographical, or not, but it sounds that way. But, he says, I have reason to believe we both will be received in Graceland. Why the but? And there's a sense of kind of strain. The child of my first marriage, we're going to Graceland, we will both be received. He'll appreciate some of what I'm appreciating, and we'll both be welcomed. And of course, at Graceland, you are welcomed by the tourist industry, if nothing else. And then, complete shift of focus, and I can't remember whether there's a kind of musical shift. She comes back to tell me she's gone. She, suddenly out of the blue, a female figure, and presumably someone with whom he had been quite intimate, is gone. As if I didn't know that, as if I didn't know my own bed, as if I'd never noticed the way she brushed her hair from her forehead. And bed and forehead, you can say forehead, but still there's that kind of half rhyme. And so, what is she going to Graceland? What this kind of memory? Perhaps this is, in fact, from his first marriage, and because the child of his first marriage is there, he's thinking of this. But then he goes further and quotes this woman, and she said, "Losing love is like a window in your heart. Everybody sees you're blown apart. Everybody feels the wind blow." And suddenly, there's this kind of emotional violence, and there's that other song in this album. Soldiers are by the roadside, and there's a bomb goes off, and the shop windows are shattered, and the bomb was in a baby carriage set off by a radio. Oh my God, this is about violence, and then the rest of the song just kind of moves away from that, and it's "Don't cry, baby, don't cry." So, if you're leaning on this, you could say everybody sees you're blown apart. Now, does that refer to a marriage, a couple that are blown apart when they divorce or when they separate, or is this you're blown apart internally, which sounds more violent, like your heart is completely shattered? But both of those things probably are valid interpretations. But everybody, and it's this funny going public. Suddenly, what was we would think is a very private thing that you wouldn't, voluntarily, broadcast all over the airwaves. But everybody can see, and you can't hide it. So then back and repeating the stanza, if you can call it a stanza. And my traveling companions are ghosts and empty sockets. I'm looking at ghosts and empties. So what happened to your 9-year-old travel companion? He presumably still there, but his mind has suddenly gone off into this other, almost kind of haunted quality. And it seems not so much a personal haunting here as perhaps something to do with Mississippi, the Civil War. I can't figure out why he calls Mississippi the cradle of the Civil War. It wasn't. However, you could say it was the cradle of the Civil Rights movement, and I think there's a channeling of the Civil Rights protests, and Mississippi kind of notoriously, central in that kind of struggle at a certain point, just as Simon is coming of age and becoming a important public singer. I'm looking at ghosts and empties, and for some reason I think of beer bottles or something. Empty sockets, yeah, okay, the light bulb's been taken out, but empties, I would think, oh, I've already killed them off. But I've reason to believe we all will be received in Graceland, and then it's that kind of redemptive yet communal message, and I think that's a very, I'm interested in the kind of religious dimensions, or the spiritual dimensions of his writing. He says, in interviews that God and spirituality and family and love are important themes, and you think, oh yeah, that's everybody loves those, but there is this kind of outreach from his songs from a very personal kind of stance, but it's inclusive, and it's not, we're saved and you're damned. Jesus loves me, but he can't stand you. A wonderful song by the Austin Lounge Lizards, you probably know. And then this girl in New York City who calls herself a human trampoline. Maybe it is just kind of absurd. Maybe just, the words fit the rhythm, and let's put them in and see what happens. But, barring some more obscene reference, which I don't think that would be out of character with this poem, it's something about bouncing and landing and bouncing back. And again, there's a sense of you fall on a trampoline, but then you bounce up. And sometimes when I'm falling, flying, or tumbling in turmoil, I say, whoa, so this is what she means. And now, is this supposed to be, are we supposed to think the same woman, or are we supposed to think another woman, or, and what is their relationship? But no, that's not, prying into that doesn't really get you anywhere. And then bringing it back, you thought this was way out of line. I was kind of going off on another tangent. She means we're bouncing into Graceland, and I see losing love. So she says, the other woman, or the same woman in another stanza, she said, and now I see that losing love is like a window in your heart. Everybody sees you, you're blown apart. Everybody feels the wind blow. I'm not sure that you can track these kinds of things consciously. I'm sure you can't track them while you're listening to these incredible rhythms and melodies. And by the way, the Everly Brothers are singing backup there, and I think that's a really significant thing. The old rock and roll is coming in. It's not Ladysmith Black Mambazo who are featured in other songs as the kind of backup singers, but the good old Everly Brothers. I didn't even know they were still around. In Graceland, I'm going to Graceland for reasons I cannot explain, and that's I think a very honest kind of thing. He's either mentally or, do you know if he ever did this trip, or this is just a mental traveler, as Blake says, for reasons I cannot explain. But there's something that's impelling me, and why do people go on pilgrimages? Well, it's usually for reasons they can't explain. This is some hankering to get closer to, some transcendent or numinous or divine, aura, but you're not sure. Just going to St. James of Compostela, is going to Jerusalem really going to get me in the presence of whichever God it is that I'm concerned with? There's some part of me wants to see Graceland. And then kind of backing off of that kind of optimistic inclusiveness, be obliged to defend every love, every ending. Like, maybe I'm not going to be received in Graceland. Maybe a nice Jewish boy from New York is not going to be quite so welcome. Or maybe there's no obligations now. And so, again, he's sort of thinking himself into a problem and out of a problem. Maybe I've reason to believe we all will be received in Graceland. And then repeating whoa, in Graceland, in Graceland, in Graceland, I'm going to Graceland. And I think by the end of the song, you know, we're all drawn into this. We are going to Graceland in a kind of company with Paul Simon. Now, one other thing that really struck me as I was reading the first few lines, he says, I'm following the river, obviously the Mississippi River, down the highway. He's coming up to Memphis, which is actually just before you get into the Mississippi Delta. But you think, what was that highway? Highway 61. And immediately, you know, Dylan's Highway 61 revisited. And think of the opening lines of that song. God said to Abraham, kill me your son. Abe said, man, you must be putting me on. I mean, talk about iconoclastic. And again, it's about a sort of circus going down Highway 61. This is before Graceland became the pilgrimage site because Elvis was still alive and, you know, Dylan was just starting out. But in a way, now whether Paul Simon would want to, you know, say, oh yeah, I was thinking of Dylan, or say, you're crazy. I mean, still for a listener who's been around for a while, has been listening to popular music with popular music with an attitude, popular music that rises above the kind of dreck that washes in with the tide and washes out with the tide. These are part of a canon, an emerging canon of poems that work as
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.